So I know I went off on a really big divergent rant, but acute versus chronic, localized versus systemic, people just don't understand the differences. And this includes scientists. I mean, even like inflammation. God, a great example of this is on the Joe Rogan Game Changers debate, where John Wilkes was talking about inflammation. He said, if you're training for exercise, and you're having higher levels of inflammation from that, and then you go and eat meat afterwards, like now you're compounding that inflammation. And I just remember thinking, you just don't understand the difference between acute versus chronic. These aren't even the same types of inflammation, right? Like your acute inflammatory response from exercise means nothing. Well, it actually doesn't mean nothing.
It's beneficial, actually.
Exercise it. Yeah. So here's the crazy thing about exercise. If you were an alien and you didn't know anything about exercise, but you knew about human physiology, and I told you, hey, I'm going to make you do something that increases your blood pressure, increases your heart rate, increases your free radical production, increases your inflammation, all these different things, you would go, that's horrible, don't do it. But what is exercise? It's almost like a vaccine, right? You give a controlled dose of a stressor, and your body adapts to that stressor by getting better at handling it. So what do we see in people who exercise regularly? They have lower resting heart rate, they have lower blood pressure, they have lower levels of inflammation, those sorts of things. Nutritionally, I question like these studies that look at inflammatory response in terms of post-meal injection. I really go, how much does that actually mean?
I think this stuff means absolutely nothing. I think that, when you think about the time course of something and you tell me that you measured somebody's IGF-1 or IGF-6 an hour after a meal and 2 hours later, I agree with you completely. It's totally nonsense. And by the way, your point about exercise, I think comes back to what you said when you were making that decision between nutrition science and exercise science, which was, look, exercise probably is the best drug we have. I agree emphatically with that. I think that when you think about the hormesis that comes from exercise, like I don't believe we will ever be able to develop a drug that is that remarkable. It is simply unbelievable what it can do.
No, I mean, look at it, like almost any dietary intervention, unless you're okay with just small improvements. To see big improvements, you pretty much got to lose body fat. Like that's what the crux of it is. With exercise, you get massive improvements with zero loss of weight. You can see big improvements. And so, I just implore people, one of the, and this goes for like kind of the two opposing ends, like plant-based kind of really emphatic supporters and then like low carb supporters. I'll hear a lot of people, they'll spend so much time, on these granular details of diet, and they say, well, I don't resistance exercise. I don't have time for it. And I'm like, you got time to stress over your diet on Twitter for 2 hours, but you don't have time to go into the gym or just do some push-ups at home? Like, you are missing out on the most powerful tool you have to improve your health and body composition. And even like, there was a study by Wolf looking at longevity over age 65 and found a direct association. The most powerful predictor of longevity after age 65 was how much lean body mass you had. That was the most powerful predictor of who lived the longest after age 65, was your level of lean body mass.
Yeah, and there are lots of studies that go beyond just the sarcopenia and look at like grip strength and
yes.
and things like that. So yeah, I completely agree. And I love the idea, by the way, of in between Twitter feuds over your nutritional views, you have to do some push-ups. That could be the solution here to this problem. This podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Finally, I take conflicts of interest very seriously. For all of my disclosures and the companies I invest in or advise, please visit peterattiamd.com/about, where I keep an up-to-date and active list of such companies.